Julian Rothstein arrived 20 minutes earlier than usual that morning. The Montecito sun was still low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the parking lot of the sleek, minimalist building that housed the as-ever digital headquarters. He parked in his usual spot, third from the end, and sat for a moment in his car, watching the glass doors shimmer slightly in the morning light. He had developed a habit of entering the building before anyone else, not out of ambition but out of discomfort. Julian disliked small talk, especially in offices like this, where the air always seemed too curated, too artificial. He stepped out and walked across the lot with a slow, even pace, the gravel crunching faintly under his suede shoes. After entering the side door with his security fob, he made his way through the silent hallway, passing the photo wall lined with backlit portraits, mostly of Meghan Markle in carefully selected shades of beige. He paused at the kitchen to fill a glass with lukewarm filtered water, then made his way to his desk, a corner unit next to the west window where he could watch the staff parking slowly fill in. Julian wasn't a high-level executive, his title digital. Insights coordinator sounded more important than it was. His job involved tracking metrics, pulling sentiment reports, and feeding usable summaries to middle management. He was rarely in direct contact with the top of the food chain. He had only seen Meghan twice, both times from a distance, once in a hallway and once during a launch event when she waved from the other side of a glass partition. But he had a gift. He noticed things. Patterns, language, tone. And something had begun to feel off. It had started with a meeting the previous week. Julian had joined late, entering just as Miles Hampton, a younger, caffeinated marketing analyst, was wrapping up his screen share. Miles had been running through influencer metrics, but he casually mentioned that their latest viral numbers were boosted by legacy traction, a term Julian hadn't heard in previous decks. He flagged it in his notebook, a habit he'd kept from his early days in corporate PR. That phrase sat in his mind like a splinter. Over the next few days, Julian began to notice more. The patterns and press coverage felt orchestrated, not earned. The influencer mentions seemed to follow a rhythm, always from high-profile accounts who didn't normally cross paths with this kind of product. The timeline of product success didn't line up with market logic. He began creating a private document on his laptop, listing names, social tags, and connection points between the brand and external figures. Serena Williams, Ellen DeGeneres, Oprah. Each name circled back to an event, a headline, a spike in traffic. On Wednesday morning, he overheard Miles again, this time laughing in the kitchen with someone from logistics. He stood behind the refrigerator door, pouring oat milk into his cereal, and said something that Julian couldn't unhear. He mentioned how none of this works without Meghan's Rolodex, and then smirked. Julian didn't confront him. Instead, he returned to his desk and opened his tracking file. He created a new tab and labeled it Unseen Hands. That night at home, Julian sat on his patio with his laptop open and a legal pad on the table beside him. He sketched out a diagram, not of the brand, but of the people behind it, the connections, the favors, the borrowed influence. He didn't feel angry. He felt like he was watching a play unfold from backstage. The performance on the front was polished and aspirational, but behind the curtain, it looked like every other act he'd seen before. As he closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, Julian looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the Montecito sky. He didn't know what he was going to do with what he had learned, but he knew something had shifted. And once a shift like that happens, there's no going back to seeing the stage the same way again. The next morning, Julian arrived even earlier. The air still carried a crisp silence that hadn't yet been broken by the office playlist or the hiss of the espresso machine. He entered with the same quiet routine, a nod to the security camera, a sip of water from the tap, and a pause by the window to let his eyes adjust. But this time, he didn't go straight to his desk. He walked instead to the internal archive room, a small, rarely used space tucked behind the creative bullpen. His keycard granted him access without question. Inside, rows of hard drives and backup folders hummed gently in the dim light. He wasn't sure what exactly he was looking for, but he had learned over the years that answers often lived in what companies archived too early or forgot to erase. He searched by date, narrowing down files from 6 to 8 months before the brand's public launch. Most documents were typical style guides, font licenses, fragrance testing reports. But one file stood out. It was labeled Initial Deck Confidential SB. He clicked it open. The slide deck was sparse. A white background, 4 slides, no product shots, no customer data. Just a photo of Meghan on a cream couch, barefoot, holding a teacup, and under the image, the words, Elegance, Reinvented. There was no mention of a mission, no prototype, no manufacturing plan. Only a single bullet point, leverage legacy. Networks for initial positioning. He scrolled to the metadata. The file hadn't been sent to an investor. It had been emailed to Samuel Barrett, the younger brother of Meghan's former stylist and a known figure in celebrity PR circles. Julian recognized the name instantly. Samuel was infamous for creating artificial virality, often pairing luxury rollouts with just the right celebrity whisper campaigns. That explained a lot. Julian sat back staring at the screen. The brand hadn't been built with strategy. It had been built with access. Not demand-driven, but proximity-powered. He felt both impressed and disturbed. It was brilliant, in a way, but it wasn't honest. Later that afternoon, he crafted a discreet message to someone he trusted deeply, Derek Collier, a mentor from his early days in media ethics. Derek had built his reputation dissecting marketing strategies that blurred the line between authenticity and manipulation. Julian didn't send the file. He only described what he'd seen and asked one question. Is it wrong to use influence like currency if the product might still be good? By evening, Derek had replied. The message was short. It's not about the product. It's about who gets to skip the line. Julian sat with that for hours. The next morning, a short essay appeared on Derek's professional blog. Titled The New Aristocracy of Influence, it didn't name Meghan or as ever, but it didn't need to. The essay explored how some brands were quietly bypassing merit in favor of celebrity networks, calling it a silent ladder only a few are handed at birth or through marriage. The language was subtle, but sharp. Within hours, it was circulating in niche marketing circles. Julian didn't say a word at the office. He kept his routine. He smiled at the receptionist. He nodded during briefings. But he watched. By Thursday afternoon, the Daily Sentinel had picked up the tone. Their headline was less discreet. Social climber? Experts question the foundations of Meghan Markle's brand rise. The article quoted Derek's piece. It questioned whether success built through celebrity circles could ever be called earned. Social media lit up. Debates broke out. Defenders claimed jealousy. Critics called it calculated branding masquerading as purpose. Julian observed the chaos quietly from behind his screen. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't leaked anything. But somehow, he felt responsible. And for the first time in years, he didn't know which side of the truth he stood on. By Monday morning, the energy inside the As Ever office had shifted like the air before a storm. Julian noticed it immediately, the way conversations halted when certain people entered a room. The sudden surge of PR staff moving between floors, the abrupt cancellation of all weekly planning meetings. Something unspoken had taken hold, and it carried the weight of damage control. Julian remained in his usual spot by the west-facing window, quietly reviewing engagement charts, though his attention kept drifting to the movement outside his glass cubicle. He had already read the memo that had circulated quietly overnight, drafted by someone high up, maybe even the Founders Circle, but delivered under the subject line, Narrative Reinforcement Strategy. The instructions were clear: double down on community posts, amplify brand partners, and increase Meghan forward content. The goal was not to explain or defend, but to shift attention. It was a playbook Julian had seen in political campaigns: saturation through distraction. By midday, a crisis consultant arrived. Gregory Langford, a tall man in his early 60s. Julian read the words twice. He understood the strategy. Recast criticism as resilience. Turn privilege into performance. But something about the message unsettled him. It wasn't just spin, it was mythology. And it was working. By Wednesday, the brand's Instagram page posted a reel of Meghan laughing with a group of schoolgirls, tagged with the caption, "Empowerment is the best foundation." The comments were curated. Only positive ones appeared. Influencers posted matching quotes on their stories. A segment aired on a morning show calling Meghan's journey a modern fairy tale that challenges old systems. Julian kept to himself. He continued building his private timeline, documenting the days from the initial leaked article to the current PR pivot. He noticed how fast the storm had been buried under glitter, but then came the text. An anonymous number messaged him just after 9 p.m. It contained only a single sentence: "Do not assume this is about product. This is about legacy." He stared at the screen. The message was deliberate, not random. And whoever sent it knew how to say just enough without saying too much. That night, Julian couldn't sleep. He opened his laptop and rewatched archived clips of Meghan from her early days: UN speeches, college panels, charity events. Her language back then was direct, grounded, raw. Now it had morphed: elegant, yes, but distant. Aesthetics had taken over activism. He sat back and asked himself whether that shift had been survival or strategy. The next day, Julian came to the office and found his desk had been moved. Not far, just to a shared pod by the interior hallway. No explanation was given. No one looked him in the eye. His name had been removed from the agenda for Friday's Insight report. His Slack access to certain internal channels was quietly revoked. He didn't argue. He didn't ask. He just opened a blank page and typed the headline: "Influence Inherited." Then he closed his laptop and walked to the window where he used to sit, now occupied by someone new. Someone younger, smiling, already looping Meghan's quotes into branded taglines. Julian understood. The climb didn't need him anymore. It had already reached the balcony. 3 months later, Julian Rothstein no longer set his alarm for 5:30 a.m. His mornings had slowed, replaced by the soft clink of a spoon against a ceramic bowl and the occasional shuffle of his slippers across the kitchen tiles of his rented townhouse in Ojai. He had left Montecito quietly, no farewell drinks, no final presentation. His contract with As Ever had simply expired, and no one asked him to extend it. He didn't delete the files. The archive lived on a secured external drive, stored in a drawer next to a stack of unopened notebooks. He no longer opened the diagrams, the flowcharts connecting names to media bursts, the metadata links between launch days and party guests. But he remembered them. Memory had a strange way of sharpening after silence. Julian spent his days consulting small, independent brands, mostly run by first-time founders who couldn't afford glamorous photo shoots or access to glossy morning show segments. He helped them understand their customers, guided them through brand voice, and warned them gently against chasing shortcuts disguised as visibility. When they asked about his past clients, he only smiled and said he used to work in celebrity adjacent. Consumer platforms but the shadow of his never really faded. It was everywhere. On magazines, on bus stops, on the wrists of podcast hosts and the shelves of luxury department stores. Meghan's image, once tentative, had now become a permanent fixture in lifestyle media. One week she was profiled as a modern visionary. The next she was the face of quiet influence. The public debate around her had morphed. Criticism softened, praise intensified. Her climb had, over time, become the narrative itself. Julian followed quietly from afar. He no longer scrolled through comment sections or tracked hashtag sentiment. He read instead essays, opinions, pieces from media watchdogs that occasionally referenced the ethics of access. Sometimes they echoed the language from Derek Collier's essay, the one that started it all. Derek never wrote a follow-up. He didn't need to. The story had continued without him. One afternoon, Julian received a package without a return address. Inside was a hardback book titled The Architecture of Reinvention. On the cover was a woman in silhouette, backlit, indistinct but unmistakably styled in the as-ever aesthetic. Inside, one chapter was dog-eared. He opened it. The title read, Climbing with Grace, Meghan Markle and the New Blueprint of Brand Identity. The author, a marketing professor at NYU, had written glowingly about how Meghan leveraged proximity